Ever wondered what happens when you stop settling for men who can't think past next week and start choosing visionaries who reshape your entire horizon? Today, I'm breaking down exactly why I traded short sighted suitors for a rotating roster of towering white visionaries and how that shift multiplied every horizon of my life. If you're new here, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she pauses, looks around at her dating history, and realizes that her horizons haven't just narrowed, they've been actively fenced in by men who could barely see past their own shoes. For years, I tried to convince myself that compatibility meant tolerating small mindedness, that settling for less was somehow noble, that patience could compensate for someone's lack of ambition. Spoiler, it couldn't. And it didn't. What finally pushed me over the edge wasn't heartbreak, betrayal, or some dramatic cinematic plot twist. It was boredom. Pure, unshakable, soul numbing boredom. I woke up one day and realized that I had been carrying the emotional, intellectual, and aspirational burden of men who weren't even lifting themselves. They weren't bad people, they were just limited. Their visions were tiny, their dreams were flat. Their curiosity had a short expiration date, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, their lack of imagination began shrinking my world too. So I did the only logical thing. I traded them in. Not for one guy, not for two, but for a rotating roster, a curated lineup of towering, sharp minded, forward thinking white visionaries whose perspectives stretched so far they practically bent the horizon. This is the story of how my worldview expanded, my standards recalibrated, and my entire sense of possibility multiplied simply by choosing men whose minds weren't stuck in neutral. 1. When small mindedness starts feeling like a tight room. There's a claustrophobia that sneaks up on you when you're surrounded by people who don't dream. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's just there. A persistent sense that everything around you is smaller than it should be. The men I dated before were nice enough, sure, but they had a ceiling. And over time, that ceiling got lower and lower until it practically brushed the top of my head. I was ducking, literally and metaphorically, to keep myself contained inside a world that no longer fit me. Their questions were simple, their answers even simpler. Their goals, predictable. Their curiosity, mild. Their worldview, narrower than an alleyway. They didn't talk about future trends, global movement, industry shifting, AI reshaping existence, or society evolving. Instead, conversations revolved around weekend plans, trivial gossip, and the same recycled thoughts that never dared to stretch beyond the present moment. It wasn't their fault, but it wasn't my fate. 2. The first encounter with someone whose mind towered. Everything changed the night I met someone, call him Aiden, who didn't just answer questions, he expanded them. He didn't speak in circles, he spoke in trajectories. Every sentence felt like it was pulling me into another dimension where the world was bigger, broader, richer. He wasn't loud, he wasn't showy, but he was tall, physically and intellectually. It felt like standing beside a skyscraper after living in a neighborhood of single-story houses. Suddenly, everything I thought was big was revealed to be tiny. Conversations didn't end, they spiraled upward. Ideas didn't die, they branched out. He wasn't the last, just the first. Something inside me unlocked that night. I realized how hungry I was for expansive minds. Men who weren't afraid of uncharted terrain, who didn't shrink from complexity, who didn't apologize for thinking beyond the moment. 3. The roster gets curated. Let me be clear, the roster wasn't built out of rebellion. It was built out of recognition. Once I tasted the openness, ambition, and intellectual fearlessness of one visionary, I found myself attracting more. Engineers, architects, analysts, thinkers, philosophers, strategists, innovators, men who were not just tall in person, but tall in presence. Men whose mental landscapes stretched wide enough to stand inside without feeling cramped. Each one brought something different. One talked about geopolitics like it was a chessboard. Another explained economic cycles like poetry. Another mapped out human behavior with startling clarity. Another carried a philosophical calm that made every conversation feel grounding. They weren't perfect. They weren't interchangeable. They weren't superior because of their skin color. But they were unified by one thing: perspective. A wide one. A deep one. A horizon-bending one. And that's what I needed. 4. Horizons don't just expand, they multiply. Spending time with people who think big has a funny side effect. You grow rapidly. Suddenly, I wasn't the one leading every conversation, I was learning. I wasn't the one explaining complex concepts, I was absorbing them. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit someone's comfort zone, I was stretching into new dimensions. You know that feeling when you finally breathe fresh air after being stuck indoors too long? That's what intellectual compatibility feels like. That's what being around visionaries does. It's oxygen for the mind. Within months, my worldview multiplied. Books I'd never heard of became favorites. Industries I'd never cared about suddenly fascinated me. Ideas that felt abstract became part of my everyday thinking. Their influence didn't diminish me, it amplified me. 5. The roster isn't about romance, it's about momentum. People misunderstand the word roster. It doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean disrespect. It means choice. A rotating roster wasn't about juggling men, it was about cultivating experiences that accelerated my growth. It allowed me to learn from diverse minds, each offering a different angle, a different window, a different way of seeing the world. Some taught me about innovation. Some taught me about discipline. Some taught me about ambition. Some taught me about global awareness. Some taught me about emotional intelligence. And all of them reminded me of one essential truth. When you surround yourself with people who see far, you stop living small. 6. Why white visionaries became part of the equation. Before anyone twists the narrative, no, this isn't about fetishization. No, this isn't about exclusion. No, this isn't about superiority. It's about environment. The circles I stepped into, tech hubs, strategic firms, economic think groups, global innovation spaces, were overwhelmingly white. These were the men dominating those arenas. These were the men shaping the spaces I found myself in. And so naturally, the men I connected with most deeply were the ones already immersed in those landscapes. Towering, future-minded, relentlessly curious. Men who lived and breathed the very conversations I had been starving for. It wasn't about color, it was about caliber. 7. The power of choosing better. When I finally stepped back and looked at the shift in my romantic life, I realized something simple but profound. I didn't trade suitors. I traded standards. I traded small talk for expansive dialogue, complacency for ambition, limitation for possibility, comfort zones for growth zones, short-term thinkers for long-range seers, and in doing so, I didn't just change my dating life. I changed my destiny. I align myself with men who see beyond the now, men who think, build, dream, innovate, and reshape. Men who challenge me not with drama, but with intellectual depth. And that choice multiplied my horizons in ways I never knew I needed. 8. The woman I became on the other side. When you walk with giants, you stop crawling. When you engage with visionaries, you shed smallness. When you match with men whose minds stretch into tomorrow, you stop clinging to the past. I became sharper, more worldly, more ambitious, more aware, more grounded in my own potential. A woman is shaped by the world she walks through, and I had finally chosen to walk through big ones. Conclusion: horizons multiplied. Trading short-sighted suitors wasn't about romance, it was about expansion. It was about refusing to let my life be defined by people who couldn't see past themselves. Choosing a roster of towering visionaries wasn't escapism, it was alignment. My world didn't just grow, it multiplied. And once you experience that kind of expansion, going back is impossible. Thanks for watching. If this journey into power, preference, and perspective opened your mind, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps me dive deeper into stories that reshape how we choose, love, and level up. See you in the next one.